Hello and welcome to Commonplace Expertise. It's been a while since we last had our last podcast episode. Commonplace Expertise is a podcast about expertise and the people who have them. Today I'm with Stan Slap. Stan Slap is the founder and president of the international consulting company Slap, renowned for achieving maximum commitment in manager, employee, and customer cultures. He's also the author of two books, Under the Hood and Bury My Heart in Conference Room B, which I've both read and love. And when I found Stan's work, the thing that it answered for me was this sort of gnawing suspicion at the back of my head that, building large companies is not just about processes, it's also about people. And employee cultures, for all the noise and the writing about it over the years, has never really satisfied me because it's not actually been in a model that is actionable, that is actually understandable. And as we're going to see over the course of this interview, Stan's company and Stan himself has come up with a model of employee culture that is useful, that is actionable, and that makes a ton of sense. It jives with everything that I've seen in business, everything that I've experienced myself as a manager. And the thing that surprised me about Slap Company is that you're like one of corporate America or the corporate world's best kept secrets. Slap Company's got a whole bunch of amazing clients. It's basically the who's who of the Fortune 500. These are companies like Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon, and a lot of international clients as well, like Standard Bank of Africa, the largest bank on the African continent, and MTM, the largest telco on the African continent. And Stan has sat on the board of Patagonia, and he's done a whole bunch of other things because he's been, 30 years in this business. Welcome, Stan.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, good.
Good.
Sorry to hear there's a heat wave in San Francisco right now. I'm sweating as well, but Singapore's always hot, so.
Yeah. No, we whine about the weather here. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city and a beautiful weather most of the year. So, we're going to talk about employee culture today. Lots and lots about employee culture. So perhaps to set the stage, what is an employee culture? And why is it really not this highfalutin, kumbaya shit? It's something real, and it's actually about business performance, right? This is something that you say in your book again and again. So,
yeah,
take it from here.
Sure. This is definitely a conversation about business performance. So I don't know who's attending, what illustrious audience you have, but I'm assuming there are people that are in positions to run companies or advise companies at a decision-making level. And so addressing you, I would say your company, like every company, is regularly betting its success, and these days possibly its life, on the ability to roll out new strategies, be they internal strategies of readiness or transformation or external strategies of positioning and product and pricing. And yet most strategies in most companies don't really work. They really don't. If you take a hard post-mortem look at most strategies of most companies, they don't really do what they're supposed to do. They don't really cost what they're supposed to cost. They don't really happen when they're supposed to happen. Most strategies in most companies only look like they're moving forward because they're being slammed from behind by the next strategy. And, I see you out there, you're giving me that look. Okay, I'm not talking about your company. I'm just talking about every other company in the world. And that's because even the smartest companies in the world regularly subscribe to the most dangerous strategic myth, which is that a strategy has to be planned well to be successful, when in fact a strategy has to be implemented well to be successful. And implemented well starts with enrolling your culture in ferocious support of that strategic or performance goal. If you can do that, that's great. You're on your way to achieving strategic insurance. But you are building a base camp on Mount Delusional if you think that any strategic or performance goal will ever be successful without the hardcore support of this particular group. And because it's always darkest before it turns pitch black, let me make it even worse for you. Your customers are generally employees somewhere themselves. And that means they're part of the overall employee culture. And they will decide to protect or reject your company based in part on how they perceive you treat people just like them. Now, unless there are renowned circumstances, you're known as the best employer in your industry or the worst employer in your industry. A lot of that perception is going to be an intuitive mind meld between your internal culture and your external culture. But it's going to be based on, in large part, on what kind of legitimate enthusiasm your culture shows for your products, your pricing, and your policies. And so if the success of your company depends on you achieving results to other people, and those other people work for you or buy from you, understanding the true motivations of a culture is the most critical information you can have. I mean, you may say, why is this even important? I mean, you did look at the enterprise purpose of your strategic and performance plans. I mean, who can argue? The increased revenue,
Yeah.
decreased cost of sales, improved time to market, world domination. Which employee is ever going to argue with these things? In a perfect world, your culture wouldn't argue at all. It would
Mm.
immediately grasp this logic, devote itself wholeheartedly toward achieving them. Well, wake up, wipe the drool from your desk, and say hi to reality. If you want your culture to buy something from you, you have to know how to sell it. And Cedric, culture is the most overused yet
Yes.
typically least understood concept in business.
Yes.
A few years ago, culture was Merriam-Webster's word of the year. And that means, according to the most popular dictionary in the entire English language, culture was the most searched for word in the entire English language. Now, we like to say in my company, because creating maximum cultural commitment for our clients is what we do. If banana had made word of the year instead, by now companies would understand what a banana is and recognize it's not going to peel itself just to feed you. So I can explain to you what a culture is if you'd like, but we have to get on the same page and stop all the mythology and misdirection and superstition and generalized academic babble. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
know, it's really strange that companies don't understand what an employee culture is. I mean, it's been like since Peter, all the way back to Peter Drucker, right? Like, oh, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and then people cite this and they say the words, but then and never, you know, until I read your books, I didn't really have a good understanding of, like, you know, how do you actually deal with or think about culture.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little about that, right? Like, what's the model that you use to think about and reason about employee cultures that actually is useful?
Yeah. Let me get your listeners super smart on culture, and let me do it in the simplest way possible. Imagine that you lived in the jungle, and as far as you knew, you were the only person living in the jungle, because for all of your years of wandering and hollering, you had never met a single other person living in that same jungle. If that was the case, if you were isolated in your environment, what would be your constant daily, maybe minute by minute, obsessive focus? It would be to survive, right? So you would constantly be wondering, is this path safe to take, or are there snakes in the trees? Is this cave, can I take shelter in this cave, or is there a fiercer, faster animal who calls it home? If I dip my head in the water to drink, will some
Mm.
nasty thing carry my head off with it? And so if that was the case and you were alone in your environment, a great thing that could happen to you is if you finally met somebody else who lived in that same jungle, because now you have all the information you've been able to gather and vet about how to survive. You have all the information they've been able to gather and vet about how you're both exponentially safer. The best thing that could happen to you is if you finally met a lot of other people who lived in the jungle, because now you have all of this information. Everybody is safer when they share it and when they vet it. And you can go on to secondary important concerns like emotional prosperity. And this is why a culture is created. Whenever a group of people share the same basic living circumstances, all in the same jungle, all in the same tribe, all with the same chief, or all in the same company, all in the same team, all with the same manager. It is their shared beliefs about the rules of survival and emotional prosperity. How do we all survive living in this same company on the same team for the same manager? And knowing how we're going to survive, how do we get rewarded emotionally and avoid punishment?
Mm,
But a culture is not just the beliefs about the way things are around here. That's just the currency of the culture. A culture, your culture, is an independent organism living right inside the enterprise with its own purpose and all the power to make or break any management plan. Its purpose is to protect itself, not you, not the company. It will do all those things, but only if it perceives a reliable through line between what happens for the company and what happens for the culture.
right. So could you go a bit more into what you just said? That
Yeah,
there's a saying in Silicon Valley that, well, Silicon Valley tech industry,
there's
which is
a
where I'm
lot
from,
of sayings in
that
Silicon Valley.
yeah,
Yeah.
the culture is who you fire, who you reward, right? And something like that. I can't remember the exact line. And you were saying that that's not actually the culture.
No,
It's
not the culture.
basically that's the currency. Could you explain a bit more why you say that?
Yes, a culture. So a culture is an organism.
Mm,
It's a self-protective organism. Now, once you understand that a culture is an independent organism, that its entire purpose for existing is to protect itself, and then its motives are pure and unchanging, and the strength of its commitment to business performance is predictable and correctable. But you have to understand that first. And so, if you understand that, let me tell you a few more things about culture. If you understand that, you understand that a culture is not anti-business, it's not anti-change, it's not anti-management, but it is most definitely anti-unsafe. So anything it
mm,
perceives as unknown, unreliable, uncertain, untrustworthy has got threat potential, and it'll just back away from it. Because the stupidest thing you can do as a company is to blame your culture for how it's treated. Your culture is just simply interpreting its environment the best it can and reacting to protect itself accordingly. So a few more things about culture. First of all,
mm,
culture is powerful. It is
mm,
impossible to overestimate the power of a culture to affect business performance. It is the ultimate secret weapon. And if you maximize its commitment and weaponize its commitment, it's an unbeatable um, competitive edge. I'm asked all the time, what's the definition of a great culture? And I think people
mm,
expect me to say, oh, well, it's a happy culture. Okay, well, you don't want your culture actively unhappy. That would probably not be good for you. But a great culture is a committed culture. And the commitment of your culture can be measured with any metric you use to grow, operate, and protect the business. If you're hitting those metrics or exceeding them, it's because the culture wanted you to. Your culture wants something to happen, something's going to happen. If it doesn't, nothing's going to happen. Your culture is also exclusive. Every employee is immediately and automatically a member of the employee culture because the culture
mm,
knows that the more eyes looking for the safe watering hole, the safer it is for everyone. Everybody is a member of the culture except you. You are not a member of your employee culture. You are management standing outside the
mm,
culture trying to sell it something. Now, you're part of the manager culture at whatever level you are, from executive to entry level, and it operates the same way for the same reasons, but you're not part of the employee culture. As a manager at any level, you have a special place in the culture. It's a lonely place, but it's special. You are the chief. You are the chief. Don't be getting a
mm,
swell head about that, or your culture will shrink it right down for you. It just stands for chief subject of all the stories your culture tells about you. The culture is also inclusive, so it's a closed society. It is not going to reveal to you its perceptions and its beliefs. Why would it do that? That would make it vulnerable. There's no upside to the culture to do that. Um, um, so it's a closed society. Um, we've had executives. One CEO said, "And we'll just send spies into the culture. We'll hire them."
yes.
We said, "Great, you send those spies in. And wait for it, the culture will start sending you back the body parts about like, now, that's not going to work at all. A culture is, just a few more things. A culture is genetic, it's hereditary. And what I mean by that is what you want your culture to do, how you want it done, why you want it done is never going to be as important as why not. Given the logic and urgency of your corporate performance strategies, why would your culture not give its full commitment to making those happen? Well, if your culture is not giving its full commitment, it means it doesn't think it's safe and sane to do that, and it believes it has empirical data to prove that to itself. Where does that come from? Well, it didn't happen today. On average, when we do a cultural analysis, the genesis of a culture's current hesitation was 8 to 10 years ago. So your culture exists to protect itself, so it has to believe something is real or it'll go insane. And so your culture, like every culture in every company, at some point had to put a stake in the ground to say, this is the way things are around here. And as soon as it did that, it developed the core tenets of its belief system. Like, should we trust management when management talks? When we get recognized for a good performance, are we safer? When the company says, let's gather around today, here's a new plan. Is it going to be the new plan tomorrow? A lot of other things. Your culture didn't try and get it wrong when it put that stake in the ground, but it could have. It only had the data it had and its ability to interpret it. Doesn't matter. Stake goes in the ground, the culture's belief system is formed. And because the culture is a human organism, like all of us human organisms, once we decide on something, we look for data to confirm our decision, not to contradict it. So your culture has looked through the lens of what it believes is a safe or unsafe thing to do, regardless of what the company says. And it has continued to compile data that it has vetted the best it can and is believed to be true by the entire culture. So you're dealing with a legacy belief system. 3 other things to know about culture, then we can move on. First of all, it's neurotic. On a good day, on a good day, your culture is just neurotic. On a bad day, it is completely nuts. And ironically, some of the worst days for the culture are the best days for the company. The company accomplishes some major new thing, which is great for the company. It means nothing for the culture. The company announces some new macro strategy, and the culture has to wonder, what fresh hell is this? What does this mean? But it's neurotic, which means that it is cynical. That doesn't mean it doesn't care. It just means it hurts to care. It's cynical. It's dramatic, and it votes no before it votes yes. Now, if you're watching this podcast and you have ever been in an intimate relationship with anybody, you probably met somebody who's neurotic. Not you, but the other person. And you probably have learned over time that following that person around, repeating your logic over and over again, is probably not going to break through their neuroses. So a culture is neurotic. There's ways to break through the neuroses. But if a culture is neurotic and it's gripping a belief system that isn't accurate, you have to start by respecting that. 2 other things. A culture is unfoolable. You cannot fool a culture because it exists to protect itself. Its antenna are working constantly, 24/7. If it works for you, tracking you constantly, seeking information. Its perceptions are alarmingly accurate. Its credibility detector is nearly infallible. Its memory is elephantine. You cannot bribe, bluff, or bully a culture into sustainably believing or doing anything. You can't tell it what to believe, and you can't stop it from existing. But the last thing I will say about this, you can take great comfort crawling off the ledge by recognizing that your culture is objective. It is, in fact, the most rational organism imaginable. It just wants to know what's real. It deals in the real. So it may be inspired or entertained by some great stump speech you give, but it really just wants to know what's real. So it's agnostic. Your culture doesn't even mind bad news. It minds whether it can trust who's giving it the news. And it's an open system. It's not a static belief system. It has to remain open to input to continue to update the rules of survival and emotional prosperity. So Your culture will give you whatever you want. You just have to give it what it wants first. And respecting what it wants from you is the difference between its defiance and its compliance. So I would say the bottom
Mm.
line is this: it is not the responsibility of your culture to understand the business logic. It is the responsibility of your business to understand the culture's logic. Now, you get that one thing right, you're unbeatable in any market you choose to own.
Wow. That so I have so many follow-up questions, but just so that listeners who are listening to this and who haven't read anything that I've written about Stan's work, which will be on the website by the time this podcast is live, I just want to say that that what you just described was the thing that blew me away, because I'm sure everybody who's listening, you've been either on one side of the culture, inside the culture, right, as an employee, and then somebody grumbles to you like, oh, that's what management always says, they're blowing sunshine up our ass, it's irrelevant, or they don't understand what's going on the ground, right? Or you've been on the other side where you're a management and you're tasked with implementing some strategy, and then you have to go get buy-in. So everything you've talked about is usually sort of wrap up in the simple, oh, let's just go get buy-in, right? So couple questions. If a culture is an organism that just wants to protect itself, that is looking out for survival, right? What are some of the ways that management most gets wrong? It's clear that management understands that getting buy-in is important, right?
Yeah.
But they don't reason about it the way that you've just you just spent 5 minutes or so explaining all the various ways that you can think about your culture that's more useful. What are the ways that you've seen that management most gets wrong when they're trying to get buy-in from a strategy?
So what do we have, 16, 18 hours on this podcast for me to answer that? Um, well, I would say um, just a few things. To think that the culture just doesn't get it. The culture gets it.
Huh.
It doesn't make, whatever you're talking about, the culture is easily as smart as management. Um, it So if the culture is not responding to some pitch from the company, it's not that it doesn't get, it's not that it literally does not get it. When you're using too many big words, I don't understand the nuances of your strategic imperative. It may not understand why it should get up for giving it what you want from it, but it gets it. I think that one of the things that I've seen companies consistently fail to understand is if you're management, you are focused on selling something. So you're always looking forward to see what can be sold next. You're focused on success. That's management. Always looking forward to see what can be sold next. Your culture is focused on survival. It's always looking backwards to see what happened to the last thing it was sold. Did it work out as promised? And there was a toy, and I know it was in America. I'm not sure if it was where your listeners live, in the 60s, called an Etch-a-Sketch. It was this red television, red screen with two knobs on the bottom, had some graphite in it, and you could draw, it'll etch a picture. And then if you don't like it, you just shake it and start over again. That's management believes, is it believes, oh, that stuff, we'll just shake it and start over again. It doesn't work like that. The culture notices everything. And so I would say to recognize that, that's a huge question. So don't blame the culture
Right.
for how it's treated. If the culture is not behaving, it's not intentionally misbehaving. Again, it's not anti-business. It's not anti-change. It is trying to understand the known dependable rules of survival and emotional prosperity in an environment it cannot reliably control or anticipate. So it's exhausted, it's crazed, it exists to protect itself. So the safest thing to do is to say no and to hesitate. But again, that's not its permanent state, and it's not its preferred state.
Right.
The other thing that
So
managers don't understand, one other thing, is that they are a culture too.
yeah. Huh.
So you want to understand the culture. If you're management, you want to understand the culture, including if you're XCOM C-suite. Yeah, you're a subculture. Start by looking at your own hesitation to ever commit to company mandates, and recognize that your own hesitation is as reasonable and logical and fixable to you as it is to your culture. Um, so
Mm. So let's say that you're in a company and you've let the culture down before. You've made some promises and you've broken them. You have announced some big strategic direction, and then like 6 months later decide, oh, this turned out to be the wrong thing, and so we're going to change directions again. And the culture's like, what the hell, man?
yeah,
What do you do? Like, how do you regain? You've just violated their trust. They're like,
yeah,
we can't
yeah.
trust management. They don't know what's going on. They just changed their directions in the last 8 months, 18 months, right? Or so what do you do?
Yeah, not that that would ever happen in a company, but let's just say hypothetically it does. And you're right. A culture looks at this and says, well, what if we put ourselves out there for that? And it came and went without any coherent explanation. We could have been hanging out in the wind and been vulnerable. Yeah, we're not going to do that again. Um, so, first of all, is to recognize that because a culture deals in the real, it understands even more than management may understand how much control you have over things and how much control you don't have over things. So what it wants from you is to be honest with the culture and to remain committed to what you say you're committed to. That may not be a particular strategic direction. That may be the fundamental principles and purpose and how you prioritize the company, rather the culture. So you have to be honest with it, and you have to be committed to what you say you be committed to. But if you really have violated trust, the thing to do is not to expect what companies tend to expect. Companies don't just want trust from culture, first of all. They want the deepest level of trust possible. They want faith. I believe, but
Mm,
I don't know. A culture is not going to easily give that up. That unfounded trust makes it maximally vulnerable. So what you need to do is you need to start again by earning trust a little bit at a time. You basically have to say to your culture, okay, new day, new plan. In the next 60 days, here's two things that are going to happen in the name of what we just told you. And in the next 60 days, here are two things that are never going to happen in the name of what we just told you. Now, don't make them grandiose things. You got to make sure you can deliver on them. It's not, the size doesn't matter. What matters is you have respected the culture by not asking it more than it can reasonably give you without putting itself at risk. I mean, it'll give you 60 days to see two small things you'll do or won't do, see what happens. It'll send you that much. And if you start that by saying, listen, here's the new direction, here's where we're going. Forget that old direction. The dog ate that one. We have a new one. Okay, this is the new one, and everything is going to be beautiful when we achieve this one. Should you trust us about this? No, you should not trust us about this. You'd be crazy. What are you, nuts? No, you shouldn't
yeah.
trust us. We're not asking you to trust us this far. We're asking you to trust us this far. And then again, in the next 60 days, so you can deliver on it quickly, here's two things that will definitely happen. Here's two things that will definitely never happen. Now, you can tell the culture right now, we're going to deliver on those things. When we come back, and when we do, we're going to negotiate for more change, more trust. Just repeat that cycle a few times until you've rebuilt your credibility. And again, the culture is not unwilling to trust you. If it could trust you, that means its world is safer. It
Mm,
definitely wants to trust you. Um, so there are some other things.
yeah.
I don't know what other questions you're going to ask, but there's some other things that will answer that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So again, sort of still on this topic of culture, I think the thing that was difficult for me to wrap my head around, on coming with your, looking at your ideas, the thing that's most useful about your ideas is the conception that a culture is an organism that wants to protect itself. And that's the most
Mhm.
useful thing that I've seen on this topic, right? But then there's this dichotomy, right? Because it's an organism that is made of people. And managers are used to dealing with people. We are taught, at least in tech ecosystems, that you should do one-on-ones with your people. You should talk to them. You have conversations with them. And in Under the Hood, there's this beautiful section where you sort of say, like, you can grab a new hire and, like, give all the speeches and, like, get them to follow you,
Yeah.
and shadow you and understand the way you think and all that jazz. And then the instant that they leave your site and then they sit down in their cubicle and then two heads pop around the corner and go, you're the new guy, come out for lunch, right? You've lost the guy. You've lost the guy to the culture, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at is that managers know how to deal with individuals. It's their bread and butter, right? We all know how to deal with individuals. How do you keep in your head that you can deal with individuals, but then the culture is a separate, larger organism, and you still have to think about dealing with that thing, that amorphous, it's almost like a cloud that you can't really see, but it exists. How do you balance between these two perspectives?
I mean, I think you answered the questions you asked. It. Yes, you still have individual relationships with the people that you supervise. A culture doesn't trust strategies; it trusts leaders who bring its strategies. People trust people. So yes, you still the more transparent, the more intimate you are with people, the realer you are with people, and true to your word and true to your own values that shouldn't change. That still counts. The thing to recognize is, as I think you were saying, is an employee culture is not a bunch of employees. It is something entirely different. And every employee is also a card-carrying member of the culture. And it is not this cloud. It is not this amorphous, ethereal, fuzzy thing. It is a very real, structured thing that exists for a purpose. And like I said, once you understand what a culture is and understand it is trying to protect itself, it is filtering everything through that lens alone. It's looking at what happened before. It's looking to project what could happen in the future. It is very close to itself and talking. If you understand how it works, then it is a very real thing. It's a culture. A culture's motives, that it exists for a reason. It's not like, okay, that was last year's reason. Now the new reason, it's the same reason, always. And its environment is constantly unknowable and unforecastable. So it's always in this self-protective mode, even if there's not a lot of crazy stuff going on. And and you can maximize its commitment, and you can weaponize that as an unbeatable business asset. It's an asset that's always been there. It's just that companies don't understand it. So, I mean, listen, this is a 90-minute in-depth podcast. Read the book. Call us. It's what we do. Really. Yeah. It's a quick message from our sponsor. This is what we do. Okay. We maximize the commitment of manager, employee, and customer cultures.
If you're listening to this, I highly recommend picking up Under the Hood. And maybe, this is a good sort of opportunity to talk a bit about the book. So the book is structured as 7 sins, right? 7, what was it called? The actual words were 7 deadly sins of cultural commitment. These are common mistakes that companies make. And let's go through a couple of these so that listeners sort of get a taste of the book. But I highly recommend that you read the book, because the book is actually quite a quick read. It's very well organized. At the end of every deadly sin chapter, there is a sort of short summary with actionable items, right? But let's just go through a couple. So the first sin is the deadliest, and it's the biggest sin. It is failure to respect the power of an employee culture. And the point that you make in that book, which I want to, in that chapter, which I want you to talk a little bit about, is that you want to it is important to give a culture context, number 1. Number 2, predictability. And number 3, a sense of self. Could you talk a little about that?
I will. Let me preface this, as I do in the book, by saying I know there's a bunch of overachieving nut job managers at every level listening to this. So what's important is the key is not to accomplish all 7 sins. It's to avoid them. It's not like, yes, four more to go. Okay. No. Okay. So a list of anything you put in front of an overachieving executive is got it, nailed it. Next. So avoiding is key. All right. So a culture is an organism, and like any organism, it needs energy to survive. But a culture has an extraordinary need for energy because its entire purpose is to remain open on constant input, to take in any data it can find. What's being said, what's not being said, what happened before, what's happening now, rumors, facts. Right? Take all that in and crunch it like a coconut to extract hopefully reliable data it can apply to improving its own survival and emotional prosperity. That would be exhausting for a culture if it could do that, like lying on a couch playing a video game. But it can't, because you, the great Satan, you are moving it off that couch and down constant new roads in the name of improvement and performance. And that it doesn't want to go down those roads. It's never been down those roads. Hell, you probably never been down those roads. So if you imagine being back in the jungle and somebody shoving you down a dark, potentially dangerous road, and you don't want to go, but you're getting shoved down there. Your awareness has to be so acute of your environment, and so basically your culture is using most of its energy. And it's an organ that only has so much energy to give, so it's using most of its energy just to get through the day. If it perceives an environment of heightened uncertainty or anxiety, it will take that remaining ozone layer, this thin ozone layer of discretionary energy, take it and hunker down and hold on to it because it doesn't know where it's going to need to protect itself. And so this is a mistake that companies and managers make all the time. And this is what I'm saying in the book is it's like you're stepping on the gas without checking to see if there's any fuel in the tank. Because anything you want new from your culture, start doing this, stop doing that, do more of this, less of that, anything like that requires its discretionary energy. And it's using almost all of its energy already. So how do you get this thin ozone layer? There are three, very quickly, look at them like fuel tanks of a culture's energy that you want topped off all the time, especially if you're asking a culture to do something new. The first one, they're not really in any order, but the first one is context. This is your culture looking backwards. Is there context for why what you're asking it to do now? Does that exist? Is there a reason? Can it link it to something? I understand why we're being asked to do this. It's based on something more permanent. Can we do this? And if your culture has context for what it's doing, it doesn't have to expend any extra energy looking for the threat potential, the unknown. The energy stays in the tank. That's available to you. It can give you energy off the top without threatening its main fuel supply. The next is predictability. This is your culture looking forward. Can your culture understand what's going to happen next? Again, if your culture can understand what's going to happen next, it doesn't have to dispatch any extra energy to keep a nervous eye on the threat potential of the future. It stays in that. I can give you some quick answers to how to do each one of these things if you want. I don't know if you want to go through all 7 cents.
Yes.
And the third one is sense of self. Can your culture take a positive sense of self from its affiliation with the company and what the company stands for and how the company does business? Now you want quick? Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's go through a couple of examples,
All right, I'll go
stories
through
about these three points.
Okay, so let's talk about context. Here we deal with a culture, your culture, and change. And the general mythology about a culture and change is a culture hates change. Cultures just hate change. That is so unfair, so pejorative to a culture. A culture doesn't hate change. A culture is focused on understanding the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. What does any strategic or organizational change do? It screws with the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. So I used to know my job. Now you're changing that job. I have to re-earn my competence. Unsafe. I used to have relationships I could depend on. I knew people, they knew me. Now we're being reorged. I don't have those relationships. Unsafe. I used to know what my bonus meant when I got it, or more importantly, if I didn't. Now we have some groovy new comp program with a higher ceiling, but I don't know what it means. Unsafe. A culture doesn't hate change. It hates the loss of the known that change represents. the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. I'm going to tell your audience exactly what to do about this. But before, because I know a lot of them are executives, I have spent countless hours that I wish I could generally get back in C-suite meetings with a bunch of execs who say, they sit around that big conference table and they say, well, we don't have a problem with change. Must be why we're senior management. Well, let's face it, change is a whole lot easier to deal with if you invented the damn change yourself. And if that change isn't going to happen until you're ready for it to happen, and when it does happen, you have a bunch of resources to throw at the change to make it happen. By the time change hits your employee culture, it's live, Jack. The C-suite clock has started way before the culture's clock gets started. So your culture is expected to hear about it, understand it, embrace it, and translate it into action all in about the same 60 seconds. So you really can't blame a culture for detesting this. It was just whistling down the street when a 10-ton change safe fell from the floor right above in front of it. It's going to be very hesitant to keep boldly walking. And the problem is, because your culture didn't see this change coming, it trips that neurotic wire. Now the culture says, well, who knows what else can change? Maybe anything, maybe everything. And it just enters that neurotic state that's very difficult to say, we need you to subscribe to this business logic. Meanwhile, by the way, back in the C-suite, it's, well, you know what? There was some bitching about the change at first. We don't hear that anymore. That's all gone now. That's right, you don't hear it anymore. That's right, it's all gone. It's all gone underground to the employee culture where you can't hear it anymore. And the culture is activated as guerrilla networks. It's dynamiting bridges and messing with supply chain, reaching out to your customer culture to stop this change dead in its tracks. So what can you do? What can you do about this? The key is to understand the problem you have to solve, which is you've got to get your culture out of that neurotic state, believing that anything could change at any time. Your culture has all the emotional and intellectual wherewithal to deal with any change in the business, as long as they don't think that their entire foundation is susceptible to sudden radical change. So you need to return it to its objective state. And the way to do this is going to sound so simple, Cedric. It's going to be like, really? This is why you get the big bucks? But it's the one thing that companies consistently fail to do. And the more change intensive they are, the more they repeat this error. When you are explaining what is changing to your culture, you must take the time to explain what isn't changing. So if you can have 5 PowerPoint slides with 5 bullet points each about all the things that's not happening anymore, this is new, great, that's great. Follow them with 50 PowerPoint slides about here's everything that is not changing. The big things, the small things, the great things, the frustrating things. And it's just giving that culture back its perspective of their entire world has not rocked. It's only these few things. Most of their world is what it was yesterday. And at that point, you get all its objectivity and all its power on your behalf, focused on what you want it to do. And this is critical, especially if you want behaviors from your culture. Like if you want your culture to adopt a process, agile. You want your culture to adopt an agile process, you have to teach that. You want it to adopt agile behaviors, you have to convince it. Now, it already has, it's a human organism. It already has accountability and flexibility and resilience. Those are human behaviors. It already has a latent ability to give you all of those. You have to convince it to give them all to you. So anyway, you have to focus on what isn't changing. Let me just give you very quickly, predictability. No, of course you cannot tell what's going to happen next. This is, we're facing a world of unprecedented uncertainty. No, you cannot tell what's going to happen next, but you don't have to. What you should be able to tell your culture is what you do about it if it did happen. So if you gather with your culture and say, listen, we're here in terms of our performance, and we need to go here in this amount of time. let's put on the table together anything likely or unlikely that could happen between where we are and where we need to go. It may seem like an infinite list, not that, it won't be that long. Now, let's look at these things and let us confirm to you what this company would do if any of these things happened. At least you let the culture know, okay, I may not know what's going to happen, but I'm damn sure what would happen here if it happened out there. In
Mm.
terms of sense of self, I just want to remind you that everybody who works, everybody, every member of your employee culture, every member executive to entry level of your manager culture, you, if you're listening, you're watching this, every human being that works has got to constantly answer two questions. From people that they don't know, it's, so what do you do? And from people who know them the best, it's, so what did you do today?
Mm.
And if the answer to those two constant queries do not reinforce a positive sense of the culture, they are working for a company of legitimate integrity, legitimate humanity, legitimate purpose. Um, then every time those questions are asked, energy is being drained.
Ah.
That's only one cent.
So,
We're only on the
yeah.
first cent.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're gonna jump around. I'm gonna
Okay.
jump around to the juicy bits. But follow-up question, because I think as people, the question that's in my head after I listen to this, right? It's like, you work with very large companies, 1,000, 5,000 man organizations, large companies, much larger, sorry. But okay, in the thousands, right? You are describing something that is easy to sort of comprehend if you're your set of executives dealing with an employee culture. But how do you roll this out, right? How do you've got a strategy, you want to roll it out to like 1,000 people across like 5 different, 6 different, 12 different countries.
Yeah.
Do you educate, you've done a lot of work with these large companies. In practice, how does it usually go? Do you tell the exec team, here's how you communicate with your managers? Then you have to teach your managers to communicate in the same way to their employees, to their reports, right? How do you deploy such a large sort of set of practices?
Well, we start with conducting the world's only true cultural analytic, not
Mm.
an engagement survey. Engagement surveys, they're not going to tell you this. They are the aggregate opinions of individual employees. Um, Employees, not management. They assume that nothing happened before and they just look at current state of commitment. There's a lot of things that engagement surveys don't do. The biggest thing engagements don't do, if you ask anybody who is doing an engagement survey, conducting one or selling you one, how do we know our culture told us the truth? It may not be in the best interest of the culture to tell you the truth. Now, your culture already knows how much commitment it's planning on giving to any performance or strategic goal or behavioral requirement. It's not going to tell you because that can make it vulnerable. So the first thing you have to do is you have to implement a process that gets your culture to finally talk to you like it really talks to itself. You have to penetrate that closed society of managers from executive to entry level, employees in every position in every geography. So that's what we have. It's called Under the Hood. It is a cultural analytic where everything is revealed, every nuance of a culture's hesitation, management level to management level, subculture to subculture, geography, business unit. Finally, the culture will tell you, and we get the culture to tell you where that started. What was the genesis of its hesitation? What are the iconic moments it considers provable since then that caused it to retain that hesitation? And so everything, we know everything. And we get the culture to say, listen, if you want us to address our commitment to the business performance, this is what you actually need to address with us. At that point, we develop a 1-year tactical, practical, and highly measurable action plan. And then we can begin to focus. So we just had a company, major company. And they are in the midst of a strategy that has got existential implications. Like if they don't execute on repositioning themselves in the marketplace, they're going to go under the wheel. Um, and And the CEO is looking at their culture, and it's a very successful company, and saying there's complacency, there's risk aversion, there's all these things. We're going to hit the wall. I can see this coming. We can do our ongoing business very well. We're not going to shift. We're not going to pivot. I can see us hitting the wall, and this is a timed strategy because we're in a hyper competitive market. We've got to do this. So they brought us in, and we did this. We did this analytic. And again, this is a true cultural analytic. So everything is revealed. Every reveal is actionable. Every action, the impact of every action is measurable in terms of business performance. And one of the things we found is that we look at the way the executive, the XCOM, the C-suite answered everything, and they were very positive. They had booked themselves the honeymoon suite on the Good Ship Lollipop. Everything is fabulous. Don't ask. Don't worry about it. And there was a very sharp drop to their next level. So basically SVP level that reported directly to the C-suite, which was the most negative subculture about everything in the entire survey process. Now, there's two things that can happen. Well, three things that can happen, I suppose. Maybe two from there. If it starts positive and sharply drops to negative, it can continue. You'd expect, well, the people who report for the SVPs are even more negative, and it just goes down, down, down. That didn't happen here. It started high, it dropped sharply, and then it evened out and did not get more negative as it descended through the hierarchy levels of management to employees. And what we had to tell the enterprise is, first of all, that means that your second highest level of management is holding the line for you. It's not getting fed, but it is feeding everybody else, which means you are exhausting your next level of executive bench. You are exhausting the implementation arm of your executive branch because it's under constant pressure without, it's giving but not getting. The entire enterprise is incredibly vulnerable. We went from there because we just the analytics team hunts for the truth until we find it, triangulate every finding, quantitative, qualitative, ethnographic. So we went back to the executive team and said, it is not possible for you to be maximally committed and default on leadership to this second level. It's just not possible. You could not be united in emotional purpose. You could not have a clearly well-functioning, voluntarily supportive XCOM, and this would not happen. So we busted open XCOM, and they said, well, okay. Did we say things were great? Slight revision. Things suck. Things suck. And from there, we were able to take XCOM as a subculture and work on that and fix that, and then work on the next level down and straighten that up, which we did. It went like this. When we were finished a year later, it was up and like that across the board. And that lifted every other level. But you basically, my long-winded way of saying, there's no way around it. You have to get the culture to tell you what it doesn't want to tell you. And an engagement survey won't do that. It may have its place, but it's not going to do that. That's where we start, Cedric. Once we get that, we know what's needed and we know where to put. So we create a 12-month action plan. And every action is measurable in terms of business performance. We transfer the competency. Another thing that has to happen, and then I'll shut up here, is every level of management has to understand how a culture really works and how to get theirs to work for them. If you're listening to this podcast, you're managing a group of people, you're a manager, I can tell you, because we do this all the time. If I ask any manager, what do you manage? They will say they manage a P&L or a process or, in a big company, a place, and you look at them and they go, well, that's not it? Was some trick question? What else do I manage? Eventually they're going to say, people, I manage people. It is? That's what it is? Yes, of course, that's what I was going to say. But you're going to be waiting a long time to tell you they manage a culture. unless every level of management can take a handoff from the top and drive it successfully through their own level of culture, so strategies are not DOA or diluted beyond recognition, nothing's going to work. So we also transfer that competence.
Right.
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 Yeah.
I mean, so one obvious question here is, it doesn't take very large for an employee culture to actually matter for execution, right? You don't have to hit 1,000 people. I'd say a couple hundred people.
Two people, and you've got a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's easy. I'm sure it's quite obvious to say that it's easier to figure out how. You usually hear managers going like, I don't have the buy-in. I don't have the buy-in from my folks. They can feel it in their bones, right? Because they're dealing with these people. Like if I'm managing 15 people, I see them every day. I can get a sense like they're not buying into this process change or this new strategy that you've given me from on high. The question that I'm trying to get at is like, there are people listening to this who are managing 100 people organizations or 1,000 people organizations, right? Like, and they're not able to see down the ranks. They can sort of get a feel for like their immediate management, right? And say that they can't hire you to come in and do the analytic. What are one or two things they can start doing that would make them smarter about what's actually going? You said that it's gone underground, it's gone in guerrilla warfare, the employee culture. They don't have buy-in. 3 levels deep, they're blowing up the bridges, right? Yep. What are one or two things that they should realize that they don't understand what's going on deep in the trenches?
Okay.
And how can they get it to talk to them?
I'll give you. Well, they may not get. The culture may still not be willing to talk to you, but that doesn't mean it won't revise its commitment to you. It can do that. So I tell you, it's a 4-step process that we use. It's our own 4-step process. It works all the time. So the first thing is you have to set context. You have to explain what is most important. And it has to be something beyond business goals, no matter how important that is, because those change all the time. There has to be a greater emotional purpose to the business. Even if it's just your organization, you have to stand for something. And let me give you a quick story about this, okay? We don't put our client's name in the street, so I won't tell you the client name, but it is one of the largest hotel chains in the world. And the CEO of that chain understood that there was some connection between cultural commitment and business performance. So before he called us in, he instructed his C-suite to go through every policy and procedure in the entire company that could affect the working life of the culture and make it better, if you can make it better. And they dutifully did this, and they revised a bunch of stuff. Now, it was more than this, but let's say 20 things. You couldn't show your tattoos if you were guest facing, and so they changed that unless it said "Hey you." They made paternity leave equivalent to maternity leave. They fumigated and painted the break rooms instead of just spending all the money on the guest facing lobbies. And so they made all these changes. So they did all these things and they presented them to the culture. And the culture looked at those things and said, those are really good things. Every one of these things is better than what it was. Now, we deal in the real, so we know you want something for these things. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drag it back to our cave, and we're going to put it on the scale and take out the books from the library shelf that have the exchange rates, and here's what you have bought in terms of our increased commitment. And they did. They increased commitment to business performance. And business went up, and then it went right back down. And what the culture said is, you want more from us? Give us more things. And what this company innocently did, is they created a transactional culture when what they wanted was a protective culture. Now, the difference, the one thing that they missed doing, the one thing, is before they did those 20 things, those 20 improvements, if they had set context by saying, listen, who you are in this company is even more important than what you do if we get right down to it. This is the value of humanity. This is our culture, and this is what we feel about our culture. Then they do those 20 things. Each one of those 20 things is now a proof point. Wait, you said this is important, and you did this. You said this, you did this. If the culture's got that many proof points about the connection between what you say and what you do, it's a dependable environment. It's a safer place. Of course, we'll protect a safer place. We don't even care about the material advantage. So they missed it and they failed it. So the first thing is, the very first thing where you are, whether you are managing 2 people, 20 people, 200, 2,000, 20,000, whatever it is you have to set context, emphatic, dramatic declaration of what matters most. And what matters most is not the obvious about hitting business goals. Once you do that,
I
I'm
just
sorry,
want
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, like you're speaking this, a light bulb went on, right? Like I always wondered, why is it that companies that give so many perks might not necessarily have the best culture? And you explain it. It's not the perks that matter. It is the connection between values, well, not values, but things that management say, and then the perks as proof points, explicit proof points to what they say. So like, I've always wondered why Google, let's just put it Google. Google's culture isn't great right now, right? It's gone through a slump in recent years, but it's amazing perks. And I have friends working in the company who sort of say, it's something is rotten. They can't really place it. And I just didn't understand. And, for the longest time, my boss and I were always, in my previous company, we were like, we need to give more perks because that's the only way to get the culture, the employees to love the company. But it never really worked, right? No matter how many company trips we took them on, there was always a bit at the back of my head that this doesn't seem right. We can just give and give, but they're cynical, they're distrustful. We don't get more buy-in for our strategies. Not to say they're bad, like the culture overall, I think was still pretty good because it was a small company. It was not that difficult to manage. But anyway, sorry. Back to the fourth step.
But employees care most about money. An employee culture cares most about the meaning of the money. It's an entirely different thing.
Not the money.
Yeah.
Right.
It's if I do this work and I get recognized for it, does that mean I'm safer in some way? And so it's not about money or it's about what money can't buy. The good news is every manager's got an unlimited budget to provide what money can't buy. Anyway, so you set this context, this emotional, emphatic, dramatic. This is what we stand for at our very core. I'm not talking about some trite mission statement or goofy list of values. I mean, really united in emotional purpose. So number one is set context. Number two is show a pattern. Then you keep doing things to show, like you said, this is most important, and you're doing things to prove it. And then the third step is to interrupt the narrative. The culture has a story it tells itself about why it's hesitating to give its full commitment. If you do something legendary, something incredible to recognize the culture's commitment, and in the book it shows how to do that kind of stuff, but if you do that, then the culture can't return to its narrative of hesitation. When it goes back to tell itself the same story, but what about this great thing? Where do we fit this into this story of no. So you interrupt its narrative. And the fourth thing is you invite the pressure test. Even if you read the book, bring us in to do the actual work for you, whatever, and you do everything exactly as you promised your culture. About 10 months, 12 months into this, your culture's going to go crazy on you. And it's going to act like you never did a single thing that you promised. When that's happening, if you actually have done what you promised, it's actually a good thing. Your culture has now recognized a pattern, gotten the narrative interrupted, you set context and held to it, and it is deciding whether it should change the DEFCON level. It should actually release more commitment to you. Before it does that, before it risks that, it's going to pressure test your commitment as a manager, as a company. It doesn't have that many ways to do that. The easiest way for the culture is to pretend to walk away. Because we don't really believe anything you say. Because if this wasn't a real commitment, at that point, the company or you as a manager go, okay, tried that for a year, got me nowhere, got it nowhere. We're going back to basics. Recognizing the pressure test for what it is and holding steady, what you get on the other side is real momentum. So inviting the pressure test to happen even earlier is the key. So you set emphatic, dramatic, emotional context about what's most important as a company or to you as a manager. You establish a pattern of showing that you mean that. You interrupt the narrative by pulling some legendary outrageous, significant move. So the culture cannot go back to the story it tells itself. And by doing that, you invite the pressure test to happen even faster and you hold steady.
Hmm. Okay, so that is a great answer. I
Okay.
think that's really actionable. That's useful. I want to jump to another sin. In the interest of time, we can't cover all the seven deadly sins. I highly recommend that you go buy the book if you're listening to this and you think what Stan is saying, it makes a lot of sense, it's actionable. But let's jump to one of the sins that really surprised me, which is number 6. So the sixth deadly sin in the book is called asking for too much trust. And at the very opening of that chapter, you sort of say, don't declare company values. If you declare company values, you're in for a world of hurt, right? And then when talking to you in preparation for this interview, you dropped something that wasn't in the book, which is that you don't recommend the companies even to have values. In the book, you were not that strong. In the book, you were like, if you have values, you kind of screw it up. But like, what should you do if you accidentally, like years ago, somebody set up values and now you're stuck with them, right? But when conversation to me, you said, don't have company values. Can you talk a bit about that? Because like company values are everywhere in the corporate world.
They are. And most of our clients are very successful and they want to be even more successful. But some of them have problems and they come to us, then we've got, we need this solved. When we find a company that is in trouble culturally, we can generally track it back to in part to their declaration of values for a couple reasons. First of all, what companies call values are very often strategies for market domination. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're not values. And here's an easy way to tell whether it's a value or a strategy. Put it under pressure. If you put a strategy under pressure, the strategy changes. It probably should change in a depth responsive management team. Something changes, we change the strategy. Put a legitimate value under pressure, people fall in it with their lives to stop it from changing. A culture is a human organism. It understands human things. Values are human things. So first of all, make sure they're really values. But the second thing is when values are presented to a culture, they are presented as the very soul and DNA of the company. You want to know what makes this company work on an elemental level. It's these 3 words, 5 words, 7 words, 9 words, these things. So they're presented as like religious doctrines. And so the culture expects them to be protected religiously. And when that doesn't happen, you've taken the most profound of human concepts, which are values, you pitched it to the most profound of human organisms, which is a culture, under perceived false pretenses. And trust is fractured at a very deep level. Now, I'm not saying you don't have values. I'm not saying you shouldn't have values. I'm saying that you get into trouble when you say you do as an act of completion. So what we advise companies all the time, and we've had many change and be successful because of it, is stop talking about them as values. Instead, refer to them as obsessions. To say these 3 things, these 5 things, these principles, we are obsessed that our company operate this way. Now, will our company always operate this way? What are you nuts? This is the real world. It's impossible. We can't tell you that our company will always operate the way we're obsessed with it operating. Do not judge us as a company by whether we always meet these obsessions. Judge us by the ferocity of our response if we ever don't. And that is not simply a rhetorical difference. That takes the heat off the company and the executive team to be flawless in protecting and promoting these values. You call a value a rainmaker in the company, just ignores the values. Under pressure, they change. Right. Their strategy, they change. That nobody can remember what they are anyway because they don't. But if they are obsessions, they are legit. I mean, people can argue with nobody can argue with the integrity of your obsession. And that gives you the ability to respond if something ever violates it and ask to be judged for the response. So that's what I mean.
That's brilliant.
Okay.
So I also want to sort of, there's a, in the book, after the 7 deadly sins, there is a section called the 4 vulnerabilities, right? And I want to talk about one of those vulnerabilities because I want people to have a taste of like what's in the book. Go read. That's a message that I've been. We can't cover everything in the book, and it's an incredible set of ideas. So the 4 vulnerabilities are 4 circumstances, very common in many companies, where the employee culture is under the greatest threat, and you have to figure out like how to deal with it. And examples of this include things like M&A. When you're acquiring a company, you've got 2 different employee cultures. How do you deal with 2 organisms basically marrying each other, right? And you talk about that. But I want to talk about the first one, which is like, what should companies know about maintaining employee culture when you're scaling fast? Business is under hypergrowth. You're growing very large. And what was something that you understood when the company was 150 people, maybe 300 people, you've kept it intact because it wasn't growing as quickly. Now it sort of feels like it's spiraling out of control. You barely recognize most of the people that you meet in the office, and you've moved to like 6 different buildings. How do you think about an employee culture, maintaining a good, healthy employee culture, which you had when you're now 6-7 times larger?
Okay. Yeah, so the first thing to recognize is you are going to be importing cultural viruses at a rate more rapid than you can protect against them. If you're really in that kind of growth mode, you're in full tilt hiring, and your cultural viruses are not going to show up wearing threat T-shirts. They're gonna present themselves as opportunities for you to gain talent and to grow. And ironically, the more certain you are about who you are as a company, the easier it is for those viruses to enter the system. Because if you say, listen, you think about working for the company, here's who we are, here's what's important to us, here's what we stand for. Now, tell me a little bit about yourself. It's a miracle. That's exactly what I stand for. And so it's a kind of an open book exam. And so you gotta recognize that these viruses are going to happen. And they're also going to happen when management comes in. There's a lot of bad lessons about how to manage people. And so in the book, there's more details about what to do. But I think the first is to recognize that these viruses are going to enter your system, and that you have to have a safety net to at least catch them before they finally get into the system. One of the danger signs that you're not doing that would be the increase in middle managers, because the executives are saying, I can't deal with this, nobody's behaving, I need a bunch of middle managers to directly supervise. Middle managers, God love them, are the blockage in the enterprise arterial system. They have all the accountability, none of the authority. Their job description is, if it sucks, suck it up. That's the entire job description. And so you have to watch out for the rise in middle management. You have to make sure that every level of manager understands how a culture works so they can get results from. So there's a number of things you can do. One of the other things I would say, and just as a brief answer, and the rest is in the book, is to protect and respect the whiners. When people start to whine in a culture, the whining is very annoying, and it seems like, well, you're just not with the program. You're trying to hold us back, and you're not with the program. In a culture, the members of the culture who become like whiners, constant complainers, in many cases were there from inception, and hold themselves to be keeper of the true flame. What this company really stood for, and who we were when we knew each other, to your point. And people whine if they care about something, and they can't stop it from being diluted or destroyed, and they can't stop caring. So one of the things is to look at whiners, and sometimes they're just whiners, and they need to be taken outside. But sometimes they are a real key indicator that the company has really lost its true purpose. I remember we deal with a lot of multi-billion dollar companies, but we also get companies who are entering the billion-dollar space for the first time. And there's something that happens to companies when they get close to the billion-dollar mark. The executive team is desperate to be in the Billionaires Boys Club and panicked that whatever got them to 999, that book of rules is thrown out, and there's a new book that they don't know and they can't find. So we had one company who said, "Listen, we're getting there, and we're afraid, like, this company's got to grow up. It's got to mature. We were wild and we were crazy, and we need to be appropriate now. We're like $1 billion company." And we said, "Yeah, okay. Well, it's true you are now at $1 billion, a looming threat on larger competitors' radar screens. They'll try and take you out for the sport of it, hyper-competitive cultures. But you cannot just be appropriate. Yeah, a process and stuff, but not the personality of the company. You have to also remain wildly inappropriate. All the crazy stuff you used to do. And if you can walk the rolling deck between appropriate and inappropriate, when the wave of growth hits, there's the magic. There's the balance. That will astound your customers and confound your competitors. So I would say don't lose the personality of the company. Keep in mind that you need a safety net to catch the cultural viruses because they won't present themselves that way. And you have to stop them from truly infiltrating. Watch for an unusual rise in middle managers. Protect and respect a lot of the whiners for their value. And transfer competency to every level of management about how a culture works.
Brilliant.
Okay.
So one last question before I let you wrap up. And this is more random. It touches on many of the things that we've talked already. But let's say that we've grown. I run a company and it's grown incredibly large, and I detect like one sub part of the organization is rotten. The employee culture is rotten. For whatever reason. It could be like, we stood up an Asian business. We didn't really touch it for a couple of years. It's a large part of our business now.
Yeah.
And then when we go in, every exec that goes in there is going, something's very wrong with the Asian culture. It's not our company. It's some weird thing, right? What do you do there? Like, or it could not be as drastic. It could be like some subdivision and you realize it's rotten because something went wrong. Like there's a bunch of bad leaders in there and it's developed its own organism. Right? I'm sure you've seen these situations before because it's possible for organisms to sort of like get cut off from the main organism and then evolve.
It is indeed.
What do you recommend managers, leaders to with this sort of really tricky, weird situation?
Well, it is a microcosm of what you can see in a larger culture. It's legitimately a subculture that has identified within its environment the rules of survival and emotional prosperity. It feels it's been overpromised and underdelivered, maybe deceived. It suffers from a deficit of legitimate leadership, just managers calling themselves leaders. And it has learned not to trust. And so the first thing I would do is first of all, is make sure that in fact the arteries don't extend beyond. Is it truly just this operating as an isolated situation? Is it like a geography that for some reason has just gone wrong? And it's doing the same things that we've been talking about. There's no real secret to do it. I mean, the culture places more priority on proximity than position. So the CEO of the company has a good day or a bad day. That's a mild interest to your culture. You have a bad day. That's a wild interest because you affect its survival and emotional prosperity. So I would say you start with, and again, these are much bigger topics, but you start with legitimate leadership, true human leadership. These are my values. This is what I learned about living. I'm not going to do without it. I'm not going to have you do without it. You commit to being transparent with the culture. We're going to take steps up. We're going to take steps back. You start earning trust a little bit at a time. You follow this 4-step process of this is what we stand for. Let me prove that with a pattern. Let me interrupt this narrative. You recognize that if a culture is cynical, that doesn't mean it doesn't care. It has energy to give you. If it's convinced that it needs to give it to you, but you recognize that its energy has probably been depleted. You focus on providing context, predictability, sense of self for how we do what we do. Um, and you earn trust a little bit at a time, just a little, make very small promises and expect the culture to just, yeah, believe it when we see it. Oh, we just saw it.
Mm.
Hmm. We just saw it again. Hmm. We just saw it one more time. Hmm. A culture, it will move on you, but you have to just follow all of these things. For absolutely do not blame a culture for how it's treated. If the culture is not, it's not a bad culture. I mean, you may have people that just can't be saved, but the culture itself is just, it's an innocent organism that is reacting to its environment to protect itself. Um, and the other thing I would say, Cedric, is go for the early adopters.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you are going to have people in there that want to trust more, or who haven't been quite as damaged, um, and work on them. Let the culture sell it to the culture for you. A message from the culture to the culture has got more impact and credibility than anything you'll send from the outside. So follow that four-step process.
Right.
Ask for trust a little bit at a time. Be legitimate. Show legitimate leadership. Don't blame the culture for how it's being treated. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And
you will
it
fix
should
it.
be
It is
fixed.
fixable.
But
Yeah.
I gotta ask, because I'm sure people are thinking this, right? Like this applies, this four-step process applies as well. And I want to get an explicit like agreement or commitment or command from you. Like this four-step process that you just described works as well, even if the subculture of this organism,
Yeah.
suborganization
Yeah.
has different values. Like if its values has diverged from the main organism, this four-step process will work in slowly bringing the values back to the
It
main
will.
organism,
It
right?
will.
Hmm.
It will. Again, with all respect to the mother company, you must always respect your mother. Again, it's this issue of the culture places the most priority on proximity, not position. You directly supervising a group of people, or wherever that country manager is, you have a greater impact on that culture's survival and emotional prosperity than the general company. And so, yes, you absolutely can. I mean, we
Hmm.
see this situation all the time. We fix it all the time by doing the things that we're talking about.
Right. Right. There's a Chinese saying, by the way, because China is so large, that the mountains are very high and the emperor is very far away. And what it's trying to say is that the local leader matters more than
It
the
does.
emperor.
It does. It does. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying. Chinese
Yeah.
obviously say it better and
Yeah.
have said it for longer than I have, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. Listen, we work in over 40 countries. We've been doing this for almost 3 decades. We've had billions of dollars of impact on some of the most successful demanding companies in the world. And it's the stuff we've been talking about. It is
Yep.
very doable, very practical, very tactical. And don't believe anybody who says you cannot measure the commitment of a culture in terms of business performance and as a terms of a predictive P&L on what's going to happen next. You can. You absolutely can. We do it all the time.
Yep.
Yep.
So we're nearly at time, and I'm going to give you a bit to wrap up. But
All
I
right.
just wanted to say, thank you for all your work. I think this interview alone, there are like a couple of there are a couple of things that are conventional wisdom accepted in the tech industry, at least the circles that I'm in, that you've sort of debunked, right? Like one of it is just culture is who you hire and reward, hire, fire, and reward. That's not true. That's not the most useful articulation of how to deal with an employee culture. You've given way more levers with your framing than the typical sort of like employee culture descriptions and little quips that people share. And I think the other thing that's really big that you answered for me was like, why is it perks are not enough? Just because you give a lot of good perks to your employees doesn't mean that you're going to get their emotional commitment. That's a separate thing completely. So I just want to thank you for your work. I think this is the first thing that I found that has actually answered a lot of the questions that I've had over the past couple of years that I didn't really know how to articulate. But before we close, I want to give you some time to talk about the work that you're doing. You said that before we started that you wanted to have a message that you want to get out, and I wanted to give you some time to sort of talk about that.
Yeah, and it's not a commercial message, and I can hear worldwide our sales team, the hair just went up on the back of their neck and going, damn it, give the commercial. What are you nuts? Like they just know there's been a disturbance in the force. Like, oh my God, Why? But I'm not going to do that. I have a message for you as a company, a message for you as management, and as a manager. And first of all, as a company, these are tough times. Whether your company is, whether COVID and interruptions in supply chain and national and international electoral turbulence has somehow fed right into your business model, or whether, like most companies, it's interrupted in some way. These have been really tough times. Now, there's two things that we know about these tough times. One is that they're not going to last forever. And two is the story of how you stood up to them will. Now, as a company, you're going to be writing that story, living with that story for a long time. It's time to start writing it so it ends the way you want it to. And the way I would start, the way I do start in my own company, is to imagine how in the world any of us ever give back for the incredibly extraordinary gift of life. How do you pay that back? Well, I mean, you practice kindness and empathy, and you strive to make the world both a better place and not a worse one. And why should that be any different in justifying the life of an enterprise? To be trusted to care about what matters most. Let this be your defining grace. And what matters most is your humanity. Over these last 4 years or so, you could have lost a lot of stuff. You could have lost revenue, market share, customers, talent, your mind, but you cannot lose your soul and survive. Now, as managers, I would say, I don't know if you're watching this podcast. I don't know how long you've been a manager. You've said that a lot of executives are watching this. So presumably you've been a manager for a long time. I don't know where you are in the arc of your management career, but I don't think it's ever too early to start looking back on it like it had already ended, because someday it will. Someday you will no longer be a manager. Your career will have concluded. When that day comes, what do you want all of that time to have stood for? Do you want to have built a company? Do you want to have made a lot of money? These are very good things. Do you want to have had a legacy impact on the lives of the human beings who helped you do that? Well, that's a great thing. Now, you don't have to give up the very good things to get the great thing. You just have to want the great thing. Understanding the true motivations of a culture can be the difference between your company's success and extreme success, and your own career or failure. But this is not just about the company. It's not just about your career. As a manager, you have a deep, lingering impact on the lives of the members of your employee culture. If they are made to feel small on the job, anxious, uncertain, diminished, well, that's not going to stay on the job. That's going to jump the fence and follow them home. And these same people are also partners and parents and neighbors and voters. The toxic impact of a diminished, uncertain population is incalculable. Now, when you look at a culture's profound search for safety and meaning in an uncertain world, it's a reminder that we're all living in the same world. We're all searching for the same thing. Treating your culture with dignity and empathy and grace is not simply a job performance tactic. It's a mirror that reflects your own true humanity. Now, in 1 minute left, Cedric, I got to tell you, I'm asked all the time if you could give just one urgent recommendation to any manager in any country, in any position, but you could only tell them one thing. What would your most urgent recommendation be for any manager? And I love it when people turn my life's work into a game show question, but I have had a chance to think about that. So let me leave your audience with this. My most urgent recommendation to you as a manager. For yourself, because it's your life that's at stake here. This time, the time you're spending in the business, you're not going to get this time back. These are the irretrievable hours of your life for your family, because the health of your family outside the job depends a lot on the health of your family inside the job. For your employees, your culture, because it's not easy working in environments of constant uncertainty and pressure with regular reminders of how little control you have over your environment for someone who you only know as management. For your customers, because people don't trust customers, they trust people. For your company, because you're not a technology company, you're not a products company, you're not a services company, you're a human company selling these things. And the pivot point upon which any strategic success rests is a discretionary effort of your human organization. You can't sell it outside if you can't sell it inside. And finally, for the world, because let's face it, things are very weird out there right now. The world is a scary, uncertain place. I mean, it's a beautiful place, but in so many ways, a scary, uncertain place. And we actually have every indication that things are likely to get a whole lot weirder before they get any better. Now, what can any manager with any responsibility in any company possibly do about the conditions that affect the world? Not much, except to extend your own humanity to the people that you are closest to, including the people you see every day, including your employees and your customers. Now, each one of us is going to have to answer for a long time if we've been a manager. We were going to have to answer to our company, to our culture, to our customers, to our community, to our children, to our conscience, our own conscience. Who were we when everything around us and inside of us was finally tested? And so for all of these reasons, I urge you to be human first and a manager second.
That is
That's
brilliant.
it.
Thank
That's
you.
all I got.
Thank you so much. So, Stan, for those who are listening, where can people best find you on the internet if they want to reach out?
Yeah, okay. Well, the website is slapcompany.com, S-L-A-P company.com. My direct email, if you want to get a hold of me, is stan@slapcompany.com. And I can certainly route you to people who are far more suited to help you, but I'm happy to talk to you myself or answer any question I can. If you want to know about solutions, we'll get you right to the people who can answer that for you. But if you have any questions or situations or want to talk about anything that we've talked about today, yeah, just give me a call. The books are sold wherever books are sold.
Yes. So the two books, again, are Under the Hood, which I recommend reading. That's the easier read. The first book, the book that was published earlier, was Bury My Heart in Conference Room B, and that's more for managers, specifically for manager culture and how to be a good leader as a manager when you're sort of split between your company's priorities and your employees, that your people who you're working for, or working to serve. And if you're interested, I highly recommend reading Under the Hood first, and then later reading Bury My Heart if you, having read both, if you're still interested in these ideas. But the immediate sort of thing that we've talked about, they're all in Under the Hood. It goes into great detail. Highly recommend that book. Stan, thank you so much for giving me an hour and a half of your time. It's been an honor. Thank you very much.